I rented this cabin way out in the woods because I needed a break from everything. Work, people, just life. You know how it is when everything just feels too much. I found the place online, some listing on a website for rentals, and it looked perfect. Secluded, quiet, no neighbors for miles. Exactly what I needed. The owner, some older guy, said he would leave the key under a rock by the front door. Easy enough. The first couple of days were exactly what I wanted. Peaceful. The woods around the cabin were thick, and I loved walking along the trails. I didn't see another person the whole time. Just the sound of the birds, the wind in the trees, and sometimes the rustle of some small animal in the bushes. It was perfect. I had brought enough food for the week. Cans of soup, pasta, that kind of stuff. I didn't want to have to leave for anything. I kept everything on a shelf in the kitchen, nice and organized. But on the third day, I noticed something strange. A can of soup I was sure I hadn't touched was missing. I looked around the kitchen, even checked my bags, but it was gone. I thought maybe I had made a mistake, maybe I ate it and forgot. I wasn't worried, not yet. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing noises outside, like twigs snapping. It could have been any animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I wasn't used to the sounds of the forest. But I couldn't help it. I ended up falling asleep with the lamp on. The next day, I decided to go for a longer hike, hoping to clear my head. I went deeper into the woods, following a trail that seemed less used. It was nice to get away from my own thoughts for a while. But when I got back to the cabin, things were different. The front door was closed, but it wasn't locked. I always locked it. Always. My stomach dropped, but I tried to stay calm. I walked inside, and at first, nothing seemed out of place. But when I went into the kitchen, I saw that some of the cans were moved around. And there, on the counter, was the can of soup that had been missing the day before. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out what was going on. Was someone messing with me? I hadn't seen anyone around, but maybe someone was out there. I decided to check the whole cabin. I looked under the bed, in the bathroom, even in the closet. Nothing. No one was there. I kept telling myself it was fine, that there was no way someone could be hiding in such a small place without me noticing. But I felt this cold, heavy feeling in my stomach that I just couldn't shake. That night, I pushed a chair under the doorknob and kept a knife from the kitchen by my bed. I didn't sleep much. Every little noise outside made me jump. I kept thinking I heard footsteps, but I couldn't be sure. I was too scared to look. In the morning, I found the chair I had put under the doorknob was moved. Just a little bit, but I knew I hadn't touched it. I knew it. My heart was racing, and I started to feel dizzy. I grabbed my phone to call someone, but there was no signal out here. The owner hadn't left any emergency numbers, and the nearest town was miles away. I packed my things. I didn't want to be there anymore. I was ready to leave, but then I realized my car keys were gone. I tore through my bags, checked every pocket, but they were nowhere. I was stuck. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped, like a rabbit in a snare, and all I could think about was getting out. I decided to hike back to the main road. I figured I could get a ride or at least find somewhere with a phone. I put on my boots and grabbed my backpack, but as I was leaving, I saw something on the edge of the clearing by the cabin. A small pile of rocks. I hadn't noticed it before, and it looked like it had been arranged deliberately. I walked over, my heart pounding in my chest, and saw that underneath the rocks was my car key. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone was playing games with me. Someone was out here, watching me. I snatched up the key and ran back to the cabin. I didn't care about my stuff anymore. I just wanted to get out. But when I got to the door, it was wide open. I knew I had closed it. I stood there, frozen, looking into the dark cabin. I didn't want to go in, but my car was just outside. I needed to get my other keys, my phone, everything. I stepped inside, moving slowly, trying not to make a sound. The cabin was dead quiet. Too quiet. Then I heard it. Breathing. It was coming from the bathroom. I felt my whole body go cold. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I was stuck, like my feet were glued to the floor. I held my breath, listening. The breathing was slow, steady, like someone trying to stay quiet. I backed away, reaching for the knife on the kitchen counter, and then I heard the floor creak behind me. I spun around, the knife raised, and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was dirty, his clothes torn, like he'd been out in the woods for a long time. His eyes were wild, staring right through me. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, blocking my way out. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted for the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I could hear him coming, heavy footsteps thudding on the floor. I pushed the dresser in front of the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely move. I heard him pounding on the door, shouting something I couldn't understand. I grabbed the window frame and pulled myself out, landing hard on the ground below. I didn't stop. I ran straight to my car, fumbling with the key, my hands slick with sweat. I could hear him behind me, still shouting, his voice getting closer. I got the door open, jumped in, and locked it just as he reached the car. He slammed his fists against the window, his face twisted in rage. I shoved the key into the ignition, my whole body trembling, and the car roared to life. I backed up, gravel spraying under the tires, and sped down the dirt road. I didn't look back. I just kept driving, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel, tears streaming down my face. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, and even then, I kept going, not slowing down until I saw the lights of a town ahead. I pulled into a gas station and just sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to catch my breath. I didn't know what to do, who to call. I was just glad to be out of those woods, away from that cabin. I still don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I'm never going back to find out. When I finally got in touch with the owner of the cabin, he acted like he didn't know what I was talking about. He said no one should have been out there, that it was impossible. But I know what I saw. My partner and I had been planning a boat trip for months. We wanted to get away, just the two of us. We rented a small boat and decided to explore some of the deserted islands off the coast. We were excited. It was supposed to be an adventure, something different. We packed enough food and water for a few days, thinking we'd have everything under control. On the second day, we found this little island that looked perfect. It was small, covered in trees, and there was a nice sandy beach where we could anchor the boat. We decided to go ashore and explore a bit, maybe set up a small camp and have lunch. We didn't think about anything else. We were too excited. We pulled the boat up on the beach, made sure it was secure, and started walking. The island seemed empty, not a soul in sight. It was exactly what we wanted. We walked for a while, taking in the sights. It was peaceful. There were birds and some small animals, but nothing else. No sign of people. After about an hour, we decided to head back to the boat. But when we got to the beach, the boat was gone. At first, we thought we must have taken a wrong turn. But it was the same spot where we left it, and the boat was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in. We ran up and down the beach, calling out, hoping maybe it had drifted and we just couldn't see it. Then we saw it, far out in the water, drifting away. The tide must have pulled it out, or maybe we hadn't secured it as well as we thought. Either way, it was too far to swim to. We were stuck. The reality hit us hard. We were stranded on a deserted island with no way to get back. We didn't have much with us. Just a small backpack with some water, a few snacks, and a flashlight. No phone signal. Nothing to help us. We sat down on the sand, trying to figure out what to do. That's when we heard a voice. "Hey, you two!" We jumped up, looking around, and saw a man coming out of the trees. He looked rough, like he hadn't shaved or washed in months. His clothes were dirty and torn. He waved at us and started walking closer. "Been here long?" he asked. We shook our heads, too shocked to say much. He told us he had been stranded there for months. His boat had broken down, and he hadn't been able to fix it. He said he'd been surviving on what he could find: coconuts, small fish, whatever washed up on shore. At first, we were relieved. At least we weren't alone. But then, something about him didn't sit right with me. He was too calm, too familiar with the situation. Like he wasn't surprised to see us at all. And when he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. It was just his mouth. He offered to show us his camp, said he had some supplies we could use. My partner wanted to go, but I felt uneasy. Something about him made my skin crawl. I suggested we try to find our own way, maybe build a signal fire, but the man insisted. He said it would be safer with him, that we'd be better off if we stuck together. We followed him, but I kept my distance. His camp was a mess. There were bits of old clothes, broken bottles, and a small tent that looked like it could collapse at any moment. He had a small fire going, but there wasn't much else. Just a few cans of food, some water in a plastic jug, and a pile of what looked like random junk. He started talking about how he'd been waiting for someone to come, that he was so glad we were here. But the way he said it didn't feel right. It felt like he was trying too hard, like he was rehearsing lines in a play. My partner didn't seem to notice, but I did. I kept watching him, and he kept glancing at me, like he knew I was onto him. As the sun started to set, he suggested we all stay in his camp for the night. He said it wasn't safe to be out in the dark. I didn't like the idea, but my partner agreed. I felt trapped. I didn't want to argue in front of him, so I went along with it. We sat by the fire, and he kept talking, telling stories about his time on the island. But none of them made any sense. He said he tried to build a raft, but it had broken apart. Yet, there was no sign of any raft. He said he'd seen other boats, but they never came close enough. The more he talked, the more I felt like he was making things up. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept my eyes half open, watching him. He was just sitting there, staring into the fire, not moving. I pretended to drift off, but I was alert, waiting. Then, I saw him stand up, quiet, like he didn't want to wake us. He walked over to where we were lying down, and I felt my heart start pounding. He just stood there, looking down at us, not saying a word. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. After what felt like forever, he turned around and walked back to the fire. I waited until I was sure he wasn't looking, then I nudged my partner and whispered that we needed to leave. We got up slowly, trying not to make any noise. He didn't move. We backed away, step by step, until we were out of the camp. Then we ran. We didn't know where we were going, just away from him. We could hear him calling after us, his voice echoing through the trees. He wasn't shouting. It was calm, almost too calm. It made my blood run cold. We ran until we couldn't run anymore. We stopped to catch our breath, and that's when we realized we were lost. The island wasn't big, but in the dark, everything looked the same. We had no idea where we were, no idea how to get back to the beach. We huddled together, trying to figure out what to do. Then we heard him again, closer this time. He was talking, but it was like he was talking to himself, saying things like, "They'll come back. They always do." I knew we couldn't stay where we were. We had to keep moving. We stumbled through the trees, trying to find a way out, but he was always behind us. I could hear his footsteps, slow and steady, like he wasn't in a hurry. Like he knew we had nowhere to go. We found a small clearing and decided to make a stand. We picked up some rocks and branches, anything we could use as a weapon. He stepped into the clearing, and I saw his face in the moonlight. He was smiling again, that same empty smile. He told us we shouldn't have run, that it was a mistake. My partner shouted at him to stay back, but he didn't listen. He just kept coming. I threw a rock and it hit him in the arm. He flinched, but it didn't stop him. He lunged forward, and I swung the branch as hard as I could. It hit him in the side of the head, and he fell. I grabbed my partner's hand, and we ran again, back toward the beach. We made it to the shore just as the first light of dawn was breaking. I couldn't believe it. I felt like we'd been running for hours. We looked out over the water, and there, in the distance, was a small boat. We started waving and shouting, hoping they'd see us. The boat got closer, and we could see 2 people on board. They waved back, and I felt a wave of relief. We were going to be okay. We were going to get out of here. The boat came ashore, and we scrambled on board, not looking back. As we pulled away from the island, I saw him standing on the beach, just watching us. He didn't shout or try to follow. He just stood there, that same empty smile on his face. I don't know what his plan was or what he would have done if we hadn't gotten away, but I'm glad I never found out. We told the people on the boat what happened, and they took us back to the mainland. I still don't know who that man was or how long he'd been on that island. But I'll never forget his face or the way he looked at us. Like we were his next meal, like he was hunting us. I went on a solo hunting trip up in the Alaskan wilderness last year. I'd done it before, but never alone. This time, I wanted the peace and quiet, just me in the woods. I planned to be out there for about a week, living off what I could catch and eating the supplies I packed. I had my rifle, a tent, some basic gear, and enough food to last me. I'd picked a spot deep in the forest, far from any towns or people. The first couple of days were fine. I set up my camp near a small river, plenty of water, and it looked like there were some good signs of game. I caught a few rabbits and even saw some deer tracks. It was cold, but I was prepared for that. I was used to the quiet, just the wind through the trees and the sound of the river nearby. But on the 3rd day, things started to feel different. I woke up early, as usual, and went out to check the snares I had set up the day before. One of them had caught a rabbit, but the others were empty. That wasn't unusual, but what struck me as odd was that one of the snares had been tampered with. The wire was twisted in a way I hadn't left it. I thought maybe it was an animal that had tried to get the bait without getting caught, but it didn't look right. It looked like someone had messed with it. I tried to shake it off and went about my day. I went further into the woods, looking for deer or anything else I could find. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, but there was nothing. Just trees and snow. Later that day, I found footprints. Human footprints. They weren't mine, and they were fresh. I'd been in that area earlier and knew I hadn't walked that way. The prints were deep, like whoever made them was carrying something heavy. They led off into the woods, away from my camp. I thought maybe it was another hunter, but I hadn't seen or heard anyone else around. I decided to follow the tracks a little ways, just to see where they went. They led deeper into the woods, twisting around trees and over rocks. Whoever it was, they knew how to move quietly. I followed them for a while, but then I heard something snap, like a branch breaking underfoot. I froze, listened, but didn't hear anything else. I decided it was better to head back to my camp before it got too dark. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside my tent, rustling, like something moving around in the dark. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe an animal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I kept my rifle close, just in case. In the morning, I found more footprints. They were closer to my camp this time, circling around. Whoever it was, they had been watching me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't alone out here. Someone was out there, following me. I started to feel scared, real scared. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to panic. I told myself I'd pack up and head out first thing in the morning. I went to check the traps again, trying to keep my mind off it, but I found something that made my blood run cold. One of the traps had been sprung, but instead of an animal, there was a small doll, like a child's toy, hanging from the snare. It was dirty and old, but there was no mistaking it. Someone had put it there, left it for me to find. I felt my stomach turn. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was out here, messing with me, playing some kind of sick game. I grabbed the doll and threw it away, trying to stay calm. I needed to leave, right then and there. I packed up as fast as I could and started heading back toward the trail where I'd come in. But as I walked, I kept finding more signs. More footprints, more twisted branches, like someone was trying to lead me somewhere. And then I found another doll, this one hanging from a tree by a string, swinging in the wind. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I was being hunted. I kept moving, trying not to think, just focusing on getting back to the trail. But the further I went, the more lost I felt. I didn't recognize anything. It was like the woods had changed around me, like I was being led away from the path. Then I heard a whistle. It was soft at first, almost like a bird call. But then it came again, louder, closer. I turned around, my rifle up, ready to shoot, but there was nothing. Just trees and shadows. I felt trapped, like a rabbit caught in a snare, with nowhere to go. I started running, not caring about the noise, just wanting to get away. I ran until I couldn't breathe, until my legs burned and my lungs felt like they'd burst. But then I saw it, my camp. I had gone in a big circle, and I was back where I started. I knew then that I was in real trouble. Whoever was out there knew these woods better than I did. They were leading me around, playing with me. I didn't know what to do. I felt like a fool for coming out here alone. I tried to think, tried to come up with a plan. I could stay at my camp and wait it out, try to defend myself. Or I could keep moving, try to find my way back. I didn't know what was worse, staying put and waiting for them to come to me, or walking into another trap. I decided to move. I couldn't stay there, not knowing what was out there. I started walking again, slower this time, trying to be quiet. But every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like a person. I felt like I was going crazy. Then, as the sun was starting to set, I saw him. A man, standing between the trees, just watching me. He was too far away to see clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me. I raised my rifle, shouting at him to go away, but he didn't move. He just stood there, like he was waiting. I fired a shot into the air, thinking it might scare him off, but he didn't even flinch. He just stood there, watching. I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, just wanting to get away from him. I ran until I tripped over a rock and fell, my rifle slipping out of my hand. I scrambled to get up, grabbing my rifle, and kept running. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted to be far away from that man. Eventually, I came to a clearing and saw smoke in the distance. I ran towards it, praying it was help, and not another trap. As I got closer, I saw it was a group of hikers. I ran to them, shouting for help. They looked at me like I was crazy, but they listened. They let me use their phone, and I called for help. A rescue team came and got me out of there. I told them about the man, about the traps and the dolls, but they didn't find anyone. They said I was lucky, that I could have died out there. I didn't argue. I just wanted to go home. I decided to take a road trip by myself last summer. I needed a break from everything, and I thought a long drive across the country would clear my head. I wanted to take my time, see parts of the country I'd never seen before. I chose the scenic route, far from the highways, sticking to the back roads where there weren't many people or traffic. I wanted the quiet. For a few days, it was perfect. I'd drive all day, then find a small motel or campsite to spend the night. The roads were mostly empty, and I enjoyed the feeling of being out there on my own. It was peaceful. I passed through a lot of small towns, but I didn't stop in any of them. They all felt too quiet, almost abandoned. On the fourth day, I decided to take a shortcut I saw on the map. It was a narrow road, more like a dirt path, cutting through some forest. It seemed like it would save me a lot of time, and I thought it might be fun to drive through the woods. I didn't see another car for miles, and the trees were thick on both sides. The road was bumpy, and I had to drive slowly. I started to feel uneasy. The sun was setting, and it was getting darker. I was about halfway down this road when my car suddenly started making a strange noise. It sputtered and jerked, and then it just died. I tried to start it again, but nothing happened. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere. I got out and popped the hood, but I didn't know much about cars. I couldn't see anything wrong, but I knew I wasn't going anywhere. I took out my phone, but there was no signal. I felt a cold sweat on my back. I waited for a while, hoping another car might come by, but it was getting dark, and I didn't see any headlights. I didn't want to stay in my car all night, so I grabbed a flashlight and my backpack and started walking. I thought if I kept going down the road, I might find a house or a gas station or something. It was stupid, I know that now, but at the time, I didn't know what else to do. I walked for about an hour, maybe more. It was pitch dark by then, and I was starting to get scared. Every little noise made me jump. I could hear things moving in the woods, probably animals, but I couldn't see anything. Then, up ahead, I saw lights. Not car lights, but a soft glow, like from a campfire or a house. I felt a wave of relief. As I got closer, I saw it was a small house, a cabin, really. There were a few people outside, standing around a fire. I called out to them, and they turned to look at me. For a moment, no one said anything. Then one of them, a man, waved me over. I explained what had happened, how my car broke down and I needed help. They listened, but something about them felt off. There were 3 men and 1 woman. They were all dressed in old, dirty clothes, like they hadn't changed in days. The man who waved me over had a long beard and a missing tooth. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like he was amused. He said they could help me, but I had to stay the night because it was too dark to go anywhere now. The woman, who looked younger than the rest, maybe in her 20s, just stared at me, didn't say a word. The other 2 men were whispering to each other, looking me up and down like I was some kind of animal. I felt uneasy, but I didn't have much choice. They offered me some food, but I wasn't hungry. I just wanted to get back to my car. I asked if they had a phone, but they said there wasn't any signal out here. The bearded man said he'd take a look at my car in the morning. For now, I should rest. He pointed to an old barn behind the house and said I could sleep there. I didn't want to go into the barn, but I didn't want to stay outside with them either. I took my backpack and went into the barn. It was dark and smelled like dirt and hay. There was an old blanket on the ground. I sat down, trying to keep calm. I thought about leaving, just walking back to my car and staying there, but I was scared. I didn't know what they'd do if I tried to leave. I sat there for hours, listening to them outside. I could hear them talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I heard them laugh, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was mean, like they were making fun of me. I felt trapped, like a mouse in a cage. After a while, I heard the barn door creak open. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it at the door. It was the younger woman. She looked at me, her eyes wide. She said I should leave, that I wasn't safe here. I asked her what she meant, but she just shook her head and told me to be quiet. Then she left, closing the door behind her. I didn't know what to do. I thought about what she said, and I knew I had to leave. I grabbed my backpack and crept to the door. I looked outside and saw them all sitting by the fire, their backs to me. I slipped out of the barn and started to run back toward the road. I hadn't gone far when I heard shouting. They had noticed I was gone. I ran as fast as I could, the flashlight bouncing in my hand. I could hear them behind me, yelling and crashing through the trees. I didn't look back. I just kept running. I made it back to my car and jumped inside, locking the doors. I tried the ignition again, but the car still wouldn't start. I was panting, my hands shaking. I could see their flashlights coming down the road. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. Then I remembered I had a flare gun in the trunk. I crawled over the seats and opened the trunk from inside. I grabbed the flare gun and loaded it. I could see them coming closer, their flashlights shining on my car. I aimed the flare gun out the window and fired. The flare shot out with a loud bang, lighting up the night. I heard them shout and saw them scatter. I didn't wait. I grabbed my backpack and ran again, into the woods this time. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, until my legs gave out and I collapsed on the ground. I lay there, listening for them, but I didn't hear anything. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually, I heard a car engine. I got up and stumbled toward the sound. It was another car, a real car, with headlights. I ran out onto the road, waving my arms. The car stopped, and a man got out. He looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I told him everything, babbling about the people and the car and the flare. He got me into his car and drove me to the nearest town. I went to the police, but they didn't find anything. They said they'd look into it, but I knew they wouldn't find them. They were too smart for that. I don't know who those people were or what they wanted, but I'm never taking the back roads again. My girlfriend, Jess, and I decided to go camping deep in a national forest last summer. We wanted to get away from everything, away from work and all the stress back home. We thought it'd be fun to find a spot way off the beaten path, somewhere no one else would go. I found a place on a map, miles from the nearest road. It was supposed to be beautiful and real quiet, so we packed up our stuff and drove out there. The drive was long, a few hours on some pretty rough roads, but we didn't mind. We were excited to be out there, just the two of us, no one else around. When we finally got there, we parked the car and hiked another couple of miles into the woods. The trees were tall and thick, and it got darker the deeper we went. But we kept going, following a trail that wasn't really a trail, more like a path made by deer or something. We found a spot by a small clearing, with a little stream nearby. It was perfect. We set up our tent and got a fire going. We spent the first night just sitting by the fire, talking and listening to the sounds of the forest. It was nice, peaceful. I remember thinking how good it felt to be out there, away from everything. The next morning, we decided to explore a bit, see what was around. We walked for a while, following the stream. The forest was so thick in some places that it was hard to get through. We came across some animal tracks, deer mostly, and Jess was excited, hoping to see some wildlife. But after about an hour, we stumbled on something that wasn't animal tracks. It was another campsite, or what was left of one. There was an old tent, collapsed and half buried under some leaves. It looked like it had been there for a while, but not too long. There were some empty cans and a backpack lying in the dirt. It didn't look right. I remember feeling a chill even though it was warm out. Jess wanted to check it out, see if anyone was around. I wasn't sure, but I didn't want to scare her, so we moved closer. The tent was empty, just torn fabric flapping in the wind. The backpack had some clothes in it, and a few other things, a flashlight, a pocket knife. But there was no food, no sign of anyone. It looked like whoever had been there left in a hurry, left everything behind. That's when we found the note. It was crumpled up, lying under a rock, like someone had tried to hide it. Jess picked it up and read it out loud. It was hard to read, the handwriting was messy, like it had been written in a rush. It said something about hearing noises at night, about feeling watched. The last line just said, "If you find this, get out." We both felt uneasy after that. Jess tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably some prank or someone just trying to scare people. But I didn't like it. I wanted to go back to our camp and pack up, leave before it got dark. But Jess wanted to stay, said we'd come all this way and she didn't want to let some stupid note ruin it. We went back to our camp, but the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, but there was nothing. Just trees and shadows. I tried to act normal for Jess, but I was scared. That night, we tried to make the best of it, cooked some food over the fire, but the woods felt different, like they were closing in on us. Jess tried to joke around, but I could tell she was nervous too. We didn't talk much, just sat there, listening to the sounds around us. Every little noise made us jump. At some point, we decided to call it a night. We got into the tent, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that note, about the empty camp. Jess fell asleep pretty quick, but I lay there, listening. Then I heard a rustling sound, like something moving in the trees. I sat up, trying to see through the tent fabric. I thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer or something. But then I heard a crack, like a branch breaking, and I knew it wasn't an animal. It was close, too close. I shook Jess awake and told her to be quiet. We sat there in the dark, listening. The sound got closer, footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving around our camp. My heart was pounding in my chest. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it at the tent flap, waiting. The footsteps stopped right outside. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to open the tent and see what was out there, but I couldn't just sit there. I whispered to Jess to get ready to run. I counted to 3, then yanked the tent flap open and shined the flashlight outside. There was nothing. No one. Just the trees and the darkness. I stepped out, still holding the flashlight, my hands shaking. I looked around, but I didn't see anything. Jess followed me out, holding a stick she grabbed from the fire. We stood there, listening, but the woods were silent. We didn't go back to sleep after that. We sat by the fire, keeping it going all night. Every so often, we'd hear something, a crack or a rustle, but we never saw anyone. By the time the sun came up, we were exhausted. I told Jess we needed to leave, and she agreed. We packed up quickly, stuffing everything into our backpacks. I kept looking around, expecting to see someone watching us, but there was nothing. We started back toward the trail, moving as fast as we could. I kept looking over my shoulder, but we didn't see anything. We were almost back to where we parked when I noticed something. Footprints in the dirt, fresh ones. They were right next to ours, following us. I didn't say anything to Jess, didn't want to scare her more than she already was, but I knew we had to hurry. When we finally reached the car, I felt a wave of relief. I threw our stuff in the back and got in, locking the doors. Jess was already in the passenger seat, looking pale. I started the car and didn't look back. We drove straight out of there, not stopping until we hit a main road. We didn't talk much on the drive back. Jess tried to make sense of it, saying it could have been animals or just our imagination, but I knew better. Someone was out there, watching us, following us. I don't know who or why, but I know we weren't alone. It's been months now, and I still think about it. When my uncle passed away, I inherited his old farm in rural Nebraska. It wasn't much, just some acres of land, a small farmhouse, and a barn. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I thought it might be a good idea to move out there. I wanted to get away from the city, from all the noise and crowds, and live a simpler life off the grid. I figured I could make something out of the place, fix it up, grow some vegetables, maybe get a few chickens. When I first got there, it was quiet, peaceful even. The land was overgrown, and the farmhouse needed work, but I didn't mind. I liked the idea of having something to keep me busy. I spent my days clearing the fields, fixing up the house, and getting everything in order. It was hard work, but I was happy. I liked the solitude, the feeling of being away from everything. But after a few weeks, I started to notice things. At first, it was just a feeling, like I was being watched. I'd be out in the field, and I'd get this sense that someone was there, just beyond the tree line, looking at me. I'd turn around, but there was never anyone there. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was getting spooked being out there alone. Then, one evening, just as the sun was setting, I saw them. Two men standing by the edge of my property, near the old fence. They were just standing there, watching me. They didn't wave or call out, just stood there. I watched them for a bit, but they didn't move. I felt uneasy, but I didn't go over to them. I thought maybe they were just passing by or lost or something. The next day, they were back. This time, there were 3 of them. Same spot, same distance. Just standing there. I tried to wave, but they didn't wave back. I could see them more clearly now, 3 men in old, dirty clothes, just staring. I shouted out, asked if they needed help or were looking for someone, but they didn't answer. Just stood there, like statues. It was starting to freak me out. I decided to walk over to them, try to see what they wanted. But as soon as I got close, they turned and walked back into the trees. I didn't follow them. Something about the way they moved, so slow and deliberate, gave me the chills. I went back to the house, locked the door, and stayed inside the rest of the day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see them standing out there in the dark, just watching. I finally dozed off around midnight, but then I woke up to a noise outside. I got up, went to the window, and saw them again. 3 shadows by the barn, moving slowly around it. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a phone. I was trying to live off the grid, remember? I just stayed inside, watching them. They didn't come closer to the house, just kept moving around the barn. After a while, they left. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there, waiting for morning. As soon as it got light, I went out to the barn to see what they were doing. There were tracks in the dirt, like they'd been walking around it all night. But nothing was missing, nothing was damaged. It was like they just wanted me to know they were there. I decided to stay armed from then on. I had my uncle's old shotgun and kept it by the door. I didn't know who these people were or what they wanted, but I wasn't going to let them scare me off. The next few days were quiet. I didn't see them again, and I started to think maybe they were just messing with me, trying to scare the new guy. But then, one afternoon, I saw smoke in the distance, near the edge of my property. I grabbed the shotgun and headed out there, thinking maybe they were camping out or something. When I got closer, I saw it wasn't a campfire. It was a small, controlled burn, like someone had set a patch of grass on fire. And there they were, standing around it, just watching it burn. I shouted at them, told them to get off my property. They just stood there, watching me. One of them, the tallest one, finally spoke. He said, "This isn't your land. You need to leave." His voice was calm, almost friendly, but his eyes were cold. I told him this was my land, that I'd inherited it fair and square. But he just shook his head and repeated, "This isn't your land. You need to leave." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, holding the shotgun, feeling helpless. They didn't move, didn't say anything else. Just stood there, watching the fire burn out. I backed away, keeping the gun pointed at them, and then turned and walked back to the house. I locked the doors and closed all the blinds. I started thinking maybe I should just leave, sell the place and go back to the city. But I didn't want to be chased off like that. I felt angry and scared all at once. That night, I kept the lights off and stayed quiet, listening for any sound outside. I heard something, a soft tapping, like fingers on glass. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. It stopped after a few minutes, and I didn't hear anything else. The next morning, I found something on my porch. A small pile of bones, animal bones, all neatly arranged in a circle. I knew it was them. I didn't know what kind of message they were trying to send, but I didn't like it. I took the bones and threw them into the woods. I shouted into the trees, told them to leave me alone, that I wasn't going anywhere. That day, I worked on fixing the fence, trying to keep busy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see them standing there. And then, I saw something else, a fresh set of footprints, leading from the woods to the back of the barn. I hadn't heard anything, Hadn't seen them, but they'd been there. I decided I had enough. I packed up some things, loaded the shotgun, and decided to leave, at least for a while. I thought maybe I could stay in town, find someone to come back with me. But as I was getting ready to leave, I saw them again. This time, they were closer, right at the edge of the field. There were more of them now, 5 or 6, just standing there, watching. I shouted at them to get off my land, that I was calling the cops. The tall one stepped forward and said again, "This isn't your land. Leave now, and you'll be safe." There was something in his voice this time, something that scared me more than anything. I could tell he meant it, that they weren't just trying to scare me. I got in my truck and started driving toward the town. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see them following me, but I didn't. I didn't stop until I got to the sheriff's office. I told him everything, about the men and the bones and the fires. He listened, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He said he'd send someone out to take a look, but I could see in his eyes he thought I was just some city guy spooked by the country. I didn't go back right away. I stayed in town for a few days, thinking about what to do. When I finally did go back, I took a friend with me, someone who knew the area better. When we got to the farm, everything was quiet. There was no sign of the men, no footprints, nothing. But I knew they'd been there. I could feel it. We checked the barn, the fields, everything. Nothing was disturbed. My friend said maybe it was just some kids messing around, or maybe I'd imagined it. But I know what I saw. I know they were real. I took a solo kayaking trip down a remote river last summer. I wanted to get away for a bit, clear my head. I'd been planning it for a while, a 3-day trip down this river that winds through miles of dense forest. No towns, no people, just nature. I thought it'd be peaceful. I'd done a few trips like this before, so I wasn't worried. I liked the idea of being alone out there. The first day was great. The river was calm, the weather was nice, and I was enjoying the quiet. I paddled for hours, just taking in the sights, stopping now and then to rest or eat. I didn't see another soul all day, and that was fine with me. By late afternoon, I found a good spot to set up camp on a little patch of sandy ground by the riverbank. I got a fire going, made some dinner, and settled in for the night. I remember thinking how good it felt to be out there, away from everything. The next morning, I got up early and packed up. I wanted to cover a lot of ground that day. The river was wider in some places, narrower in others, and there were a few spots with some tricky currents, but nothing too bad. Around midday, I stopped to eat, and that's when I saw him. Another kayaker, coming down the river from behind me. I hadn't heard him, which was odd because it was so quiet out there. He waved, and I waved back. He looked friendly enough, just a guy out on the river like me. He paddled over and asked if I minded some company. I didn't think much of it at the time, so I said sure, why not? We chatted for a bit. His name was Dan, he said, and he was on a trip like me, just out to enjoy the river. We paddled together for a while, and he seemed nice enough. But after a bit, I noticed he was asking a lot of questions, more than seemed normal. Where was I from? Was I out here alone? Did I have a phone with me? Stuff like that. I started to feel a bit uneasy, but I didn't want to be rude. I just kept my answers short and tried to steer the conversation back to normal stuff, like the river and the weather. After a while, I said I wanted to stop and rest for a bit, hoping he'd keep going. But he said he'd stop too. I was starting to feel really uncomfortable. Something about the way he was watching me, like he was sizing me up. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was just my nerves from being out there alone. But I couldn't shake the feeling. When we got back in our kayaks, I decided to pick up the pace, see if I could put some distance between us. But he kept up. No matter how fast I paddled, he was right there, not too close, but not far enough away either. It was like he was matching my speed on purpose. I tried to lose him by taking a different route down a split in the river, but he followed. I could feel my heart starting to race. I knew I had to do something. I didn't want to spend another night out there with him around. I needed to find a way to get away from him, but there was nowhere to go. The river was all there was, thick forest on both sides. It started getting late, and I knew I'd have to stop soon to set up camp. I found a spot, a little clearing by the bank, and pulled my kayak out of the water. I hoped he'd keep going, but he didn't. He pulled up right after me, saying it was a good spot to stop for the night. I didn't like it, not one bit. I was starting to feel scared. I tried to keep calm, keep my distance from him. I set up my tent a little ways away and kept my kayak close, ready to leave if I needed to. He tried to make conversation, but I was too nervous to talk much. I kept my responses short, hoping he'd get the hint. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my tent, listening. I could hear him moving around outside, hear the crackling of his fire. I felt trapped. I didn't have a phone signal out here, no way to call for help. I kept thinking about what he'd asked earlier, about whether I was alone if I had a phone. I realized he'd been trying to figure out if anyone knew where I was, if anyone would come looking for me. I must have drifted off at some point because I woke up to a noise. Footsteps, soft, right outside my tent. My heart was pounding in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and my paddle, the only thing I had for protection. I waited, holding my breath, listening. The footsteps moved away, back toward his tent. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed awake, gripping the paddle, waiting for morning. As soon as it was light enough, I got out of the tent and started packing up. I wanted to get back on the river, get away from him as fast as I could. He came out of his tent and watched me. He didn't say anything, just watched with this look on his face, like he knew I was scared. When I got back in my kayak, he got in his. I didn't say anything, just started paddling. I could hear him behind me, keeping up like before. I pushed harder, trying to go faster, but he was always right there. I felt panic rising in my chest. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew it wasn't good. Around midday, the river narrowed, and there were some rapids ahead. I decided to take a chance, go through them fast, see if I could lose him. I paddled hard, hitting the rapids as fast as I could. The water was rough, but I managed to keep control. I didn't look back, just kept going, pushing through. When I finally got through the rapids, I looked back, and he was gone. I felt a wave of relief, but I didn't stop. I kept paddling, wanting to put as much distance between us as possible. But then I heard it, his voice, calling from somewhere behind me. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was there. I didn't answer, just kept paddling. The river widened out again, and I kept going, not stopping for anything. I could feel my arms aching, my whole body exhausted, but I couldn't stop. I didn't see him again that day, but I knew he was there, somewhere behind me. I found a spot to camp just before dark, but I didn't set up my tent. I just pulled my kayak up on the bank and hid in the bushes, watching the river. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there, watching, waiting. I didn't hear anything, didn't see him, but I knew he was out there, somewhere. When morning came, I got back in my kayak and kept going. I was tired, so tired, but I couldn't stop. I just wanted to get out of there, get back to where there were people, where I'd be safe. By late afternoon, I finally saw it, the old bridge that marked the end of the trip, the place where I'd parked my car. I felt a wave of relief. I paddled harder, pushing myself, wanting to get there as fast as I could. I kept looking back, expecting to see him, but he wasn't there. When I reached the shore, I pulled my kayak up and ran to my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking, but I finally got the door open and got in. I looked back at the river one last time, half expecting to see him coming out of the trees, but he wasn't there. I didn't wait around. I started the car and drove, not stopping until I got to the nearest town. I went straight to the police station and told them everything. They listened, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. They said they'd send someone out to check, but I knew they wouldn't find him. I haven't been back to that river since. I don't think I ever will. I still think about it, though, about him and what he wanted. I don't know who he was or why he was out there, but I know I was lucky to get away. I still get scared sometimes, thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't. I went hiking last month, alone. I wanted to find some peace, get away from everything. I'd heard about this trail, not far from my place, supposed to be quiet, not many people know about it. I liked that. I packed enough for a few days, tent, food, water. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I thought it would be better that way, just me and nature for a while. The first day was fine. I followed the trail, went deep into the woods. The trees were thick, and I could barely see the sky sometimes. I liked that. It was cool, quiet, just the sound of birds and the crunch of my boots on the ground. By late afternoon, I found a good spot to camp. Set up my tent, got a small fire going. I was feeling good, better than I had in a long time. Next morning, I woke up early, packed up, and kept moving. After a few hours, I noticed something strange, a narrow path branching off the main trail. It wasn't marked on my map. I stood there for a while, looking at it, feeling curious. I decided to follow it, see where it led. The path was overgrown, like no one had used it in a long time. I had to push through the bushes, step over fallen branches. It was slow going, but I didn't mind. I wanted to see where it went. After a couple of hours, the path opened up, and I found myself standing at the edge of a valley. It was beautiful, green and wide, with a stream running through it. I hadn't seen anything like it before. I felt a strange pull, like I was meant to find this place. I decided to stay for a while, set up camp by the stream. I thought I'd explore a bit, see what else was out there. That night, I built a fire and sat by it, looking up at the stars. I hadn't seen stars like that in years, bright and clear, no city lights to block them out. I felt a kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I thought about staying longer than I planned, maybe a few more days. I had enough supplies. I could make it work. The next day, I went further into the valley. It was quiet, too quiet. I didn't see any animals, didn't hear any birds. Just the wind in the trees and the sound of the stream. After a while, I saw something up ahead, something that didn't fit. I walked closer and saw it was a small house, almost hidden among the trees. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. The place looked old, abandoned. I got closer, curious. As I got near, I noticed something else, more houses, small and scattered, almost blending in with the forest. I hadn't seen them at first. There were no roads, no paths, nothing to show anyone lived there. I felt a chill run through me. Something about the place didn't feel right. I thought maybe I should turn back, leave the valley. But then I saw them, people, just standing there, watching me. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them, men and women, all dressed in plain, dark clothes. They didn't move, didn't say anything, just watched. I felt my heart start to race. I tried to stay calm, gave them a little wave. No one waved back. I didn't like the way they were looking at me, like I didn't belong there. I took a step back, tried to smile, said something about being lost, about not meaning to intrude. They just kept staring. One of them, an older man with a beard, finally spoke. He said this was their land, that outsiders weren't welcome. His voice was calm, but there was something in his eyes, something that made me uneasy. I said I was sorry, that I'd leave right away. I turned to go, but then he said I couldn't leave, not yet. I needed to talk to their leader, make sure I wasn't a threat. I didn't like the sound of that. I tried to laugh it off, said I'd just be on my way. But they stepped forward, blocking my path. I felt panic rising in my chest. I didn't know what to do. They didn't hurt me, just took my backpack and led me to a larger house at the center of the clearing. Inside, it was dark and cold. They pushed me into a chair and left, locking the door behind them. I tried to stay calm, tried to think. I could hear them talking outside, low voices, but I couldn't make out the words. After what felt like hours, the door opened and a woman walked in. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with sharp eyes that seemed to look right through me. She asked me what I was doing there, why I'd come. I told her the truth, that I'd found the path by accident, that I was just hiking, looking for some peace. She listened, but I could tell she didn't believe me. She said this valley was theirs, that no one outside knew about it, and they wanted to keep it that way. She asked if anyone knew where I was, if I told anyone about my plans. I said no, trying to keep my voice steady. Her expression didn't change. She said I couldn't leave, not yet, not until they were sure. They locked me in that house for the rest of the day. I didn't know what they wanted, what they were planning. I tried the windows, but they were boarded up tight. The door was thick, solid wood, no way to break through. I felt trapped, helpless. I couldn't stop thinking about what they might do, if they'd ever let me go. That night, I heard them outside, talking, laughing. It sounded like a celebration. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard enough to know they were talking about me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't know how. I waited, listening, until the noise outside died down. I tried the door again, but it was still locked. I was starting to lose hope when I noticed something, a small window, high up on the wall, just big enough to squeeze through. I stacked some furniture, climbed up, and managed to pry it open. It was a tight fit, but I made it through. I dropped down outside, landed hard on the ground. I waited, listening, but no one seemed to notice. I stayed low, moved through the trees, trying to stay out of sight. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to keep going. I didn't know where I was going, just away from there, away from them. I made it to the edge of the clearing without being seen. I could see the path leading back into the woods, the one I'd come in on. I didn't know if they'd follow me, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back. The woods were dark, the path almost impossible to see, but I kept going, kept pushing myself. I ran for what felt like hours, not stopping until I was sure I was far enough away. I finally slowed down, trying to catch my breath, trying to think. I didn't know if they'd follow me, if they were out there, somewhere in the dark. I knew I had to keep moving, get as far away from that place as possible. I kept going all night, through the woods, following the path as best I could. By morning, I was exhausted, my legs aching, my lungs burning. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had to get out of there, had to find my way back to the main trail. It took me another full day to find it, but when I finally did, I felt a wave of relief. I knew I was safe, or at least safer than I'd been. I didn't stop, didn't rest, just kept moving, kept going until I saw the road, saw my car. I'd never been so happy to see anything in my life. I got in, started the engine, and drove. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back in the town where I'd started. I went straight to the police, told them everything. They listened, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. They said they'd check it out, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. I haven't been hiking since. I went out to the desert alone, just me and a pack. Wanted to see if I could do it, you know? Survive out there for a week, living off the land, testing myself. I'd been prepping for months, watching videos, reading books. I thought I was ready. I picked a spot way out in Arizona, far from any roads or towns. It was supposed to be empty out there. No one around for miles. That's what I wanted. Just me in the desert. The first day was okay. Hot as hell, but I expected that. I found some shade under a rock overhang, set up a little camp. I had my knife, some rope, a few basic supplies. I wasn't planning to use much of what I brought, though. Wanted to rely on what I could find. I spent the day setting snares, looking for water. Found a small stream after a few hours, but it was more of a trickle. Enough to fill my bottle, though. I was feeling pretty good about myself. Second day, I noticed some footprints in the sand, not mine. I got this uneasy feeling, but I figured maybe someone had passed through before. They looked fresh, though. I followed them for a bit, just to see where they went. They led off to a ridge, then disappeared. I felt a little on edge, but shook it off. It's a big desert. People come and go. No big deal, right? Later, I was out checking my snares when I saw them. 3 men, up on a hill, looking down at me. They were too far away to see clearly, but I could tell they were watching me. They had guns. I froze for a second, didn't know what to do. Then I waved, just to show I wasn't a threat. They didn't wave back. Just stood there, watching. I decided to head back to my camp, keep my distance. I didn't want any trouble. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those guys. What were they doing out here? Why were they watching me? I kept my knife close, listened for any sounds. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I didn't like it. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, close. My heart was pounding. I sat up, trying to stay quiet. I could see shadows moving outside my camp. Then, just as quick as they came, they were gone. The next morning, I found something by my camp, a dead rabbit, skinned and gutted. Just lying there, like a warning. I knew then I wasn't alone. Someone was messing with me. I didn't know what to do. I thought about packing up, heading back, but I was deep in now. It'd take at least a day to get back to my car, maybe more. I decided to move camp instead, find a new spot, stay hidden. I moved for hours, kept looking over my shoulder. I found a new spot in a rocky area, harder to see from a distance. I set up there, tried to stay calm. I was on edge, though. Every sound made me jump. I kept thinking about those men, wondering if they were still watching me. I didn't see them the rest of the day, but I could feel them out there, somewhere. On the 4th day, I saw smoke in the distance. I climbed up a ridge to get a better look. There was a camp out there, maybe a mile away. Tents, a fire, a few figures moving around. I knew it had to be them. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I decided to head back toward the stream, get some water, then figure out a way to leave. I got to the stream, started filling my bottle, when I heard a voice behind me. "You lost?" I turned and saw one of the men standing there, a rifle slung over his shoulder. He was smiling, but there was no friendliness in his eyes. I shook my head, said I was just passing through, doing a survival challenge. He laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. "This is our land," he said. "You don't belong here." I tried to stay calm, said I'd leave, no problem. He nodded, but then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You can leave," he said, "but we'll be hunting you. Or you can join us. Your choice." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, trying to think. He was still smiling, like he was enjoying this. I said I'd think about it, tried to sound casual, but I was terrified. He just nodded again and walked off, disappearing into the rocks. I knew then I had to get out of there. I couldn't stay. I packed up my camp as fast as I could, kept looking over my shoulder. I didn't know if they were watching, but I felt like they were. I started heading back the way I came, moving fast. I knew it was a long way, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there, away from those guys. I didn't see them the rest of the day, but I knew they were out there, waiting. I kept moving, didn't stop, even when it got dark. That night was the worst. I could hear them out there in the dark, moving around. I kept my knife in my hand, didn't sleep a wink. At one point, I heard a gunshot, close. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I knew they were playing with me, trying to scare me. It was working. In the morning, I found a note stuck to a tree near my camp. It said, "Tick-tock. Time's running out." I felt sick. They were serious. I knew I had to move, and fast. I packed up and kept going, tried to keep to the rocks, stay out of sight. I was tired, hungry, scared out of my mind. I kept thinking about what they'd do if they caught me. By the 6th day, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten much. I could barely keep going. I stumbled through the desert, the sun beating down on me. I started to think I wasn't going to make it. I felt like I was being hunted, like an animal. Every noise made me jump, every shadow looked like one of them. Then, around midday, I saw something up ahead of a road. I couldn't believe it. I started running, as fast as I could. I didn't care if they saw me. I just wanted to get out of there. I made it to the road, saw a car in the distance. I waved my arms, shouting, hoping they'd see me. The car slowed, stopped. A man got out, looked at me like I was crazy. I told him what happened, about the men, the ultimatum. He didn't believe me at first, thought I was dehydrated, seeing things. But then he saw the fear in my eyes, I think. He let me in his car, gave me some water. I kept looking back, expecting them to come out of the desert, guns blazing. But they didn't. He drove me to the nearest town, dropped me off at a gas station. I called the cops and told them everything. They said they'd check it out, but I could tell they didn't believe me. Said it was probably just some locals messing around. I knew better. Those guys weren't messing around. They were serious. I haven't been back out there since. I sold all my gear, stopped watching those survival videos. I still think about it sometimes, though. What would have happened if I'd stayed, if I tried to join them? I rented a cabin on a cliffside overlooking the ocean. I'd been needing a break from everything, so I thought a riding retreat in a remote spot would be perfect. The place was advertised as isolated but not completely cut off. It was supposed to be a good place for peace and inspiration. I drove out there, excited and a bit nervous, but mostly looking forward to the solitude. The cabin was as beautiful as the pictures had shown. It was small but cozy, with huge windows facing the ocean. I spent the first few hours settling in, unpacking my things, setting up my writing space. Everything seemed perfect. The view was amazing, and the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks was calming. I couldn't wait to get started on my writing. That night, after I'd settled in, I received my first message. It came through on my phone, which I'd only turned on to check the local weather. The message was from someone claiming to live nearby. It said, "Hope you're enjoying the cabin. I'm just a short walk away if you need anything." I was surprised. I hadn't seen any other cabins when I drove in, and the rental company had said the place was remote. I figured it might be a mistake or a prank. The next morning, I got another message. It was the same person, saying, "Let me know if you need anything. The weather's supposed to be bad later." It was a bit strange, but I thought maybe someone lived further down the coast or something. I didn't reply. I wanted to focus on my writing and not get distracted. That evening, I decided to take a walk. I thought maybe I'd find out where this person lived or at least get a sense of the area. I walked along the cliffs, following a path that seemed to go on forever. I didn't see any other cabins or signs of people. Just the rugged landscape and the ocean. I kept walking, hoping to come across something, but I found nothing. I went back to the cabin feeling a bit uneasy. I had another message waiting for me when I got inside. It said, "I saw you out there. Hope you're doing okay." My skin crawled a little. How could he have seen me? I hadn't seen any sign of anyone else. I decided to ignore the messages. Maybe it was someone just bored or playing a game. I didn't want to get involved. The next day, I woke up to another message. It was the same person again, asking if I'd found the trail he had mentioned. I hadn't heard about any trail from the rental company. I went outside to see if I could find anything that looked like a trail, but the area around the cabin was rough and unmarked. I felt like I was being watched, but I couldn't see anyone. That night, the wind picked up, and the weather turned nasty. The waves were crashing hard against the cliffs, and the rain was coming down in sheets. I was sitting at the table, working on my laptop, when I got another message. This one was different. It said, "I'm coming over. Hope you're ready." I was startled. Who was this person, and why would they come over in this weather? I looked outside, but all I could see was rain and darkness. I tried calling the rental company to see if they knew anything about a neighbor, but my phone kept cutting out. The storm was messing with the signal. I felt trapped. I couldn't see anyone or anything outside, but the messages kept coming. Almost there, the next one said. I locked all the doors and windows, trying to stay calm. I could hear the wind howling and the rain pounding against the cabin. It felt like the storm was trying to break through. Hours passed, and the messages stopped. I stayed up all night, jumping at every sound. I couldn't sleep, and my nerves were on edge. At dawn, I finally went outside, hoping to see if I could find any sign of this person. I walked around the cabin, looking for tracks or anything that might tell me where he had been, but there was nothing. Just rain-soaked ground and rocks. I decided to drive out and find out if there were any other cabins or signs of life in the area. I followed the road, but it was winding and deserted. I drove for miles, and still, there was nothing. No other cabins, no signs of people. Just endless landscape and ocean. I felt a deep sense of unease. Where had this person been? Had they really been watching me? When I got back to the cabin, I checked my phone. There were no new messages. I didn't know what to make of it. I spent the rest of the day packing up my things, not wanting to stay another night. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching from the cliffs. I left as soon as I could, feeling a huge sense of relief as I drove away. I didn't stop until I was back in the city. I called the rental company again, explained what had happened, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. They said there was no one living nearby, just wilderness. I haven't been back to that cabin, and I doubt I ever will. I can't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching me, even though I never saw them. The isolation that seemed so appealing at first turned into something much darker. I'm just glad I got out when I did. We moved out to the Wyoming mountains to get away from everything. The world felt too loud, too crowded, and we wanted something different for our kids. My wife and I had saved up enough to buy a small piece of land, and we built our cabin ourselves. It was hard work, but it felt right. We were far from town, but that's what we wanted. Just us, the trees, and the mountains. It was the third month when we noticed something was off. At first, it was little things. A tool would go missing, or we'd find food supplies scattered around outside. We thought it might be animals, maybe a bear, so we were careful to lock everything up at night. But it didn't stop. One morning, I went to the shed and found our axe was gone. Not just misplaced, but completely gone. I searched everywhere. My wife was worried. We had no neighbors, and we were miles from the nearest town. I tried to brush it off, but something about it felt wrong. We needed that axe to chop wood, and without it, we were in trouble. A few days later, we found our food supply had been tampered with. Bags of flour and rice were torn open, the contents spilled out and mixed with dirt. Cans had been punctured, and the meat we'd hung to dry was gone. It couldn't have been an animal. Someone was doing this. We didn't see anyone for weeks, but we knew someone was there. One evening, just before dusk, I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the trees, just watching us. A tall man, with a scraggly beard and dirty clothes, almost blending in with the forest. He didn't come closer, and when I took a step toward him, He turned and disappeared into the woods. My stomach turned. The kids were inside, and I didn't want to scare them, but my wife saw the look on my face when I came back in. I told her what I saw, and we both agreed to keep a closer eye on things. We started locking everything up tighter and keeping the kids close. But it didn't stop. One night, we woke up to a loud bang outside. I grabbed the rifle I kept by the bed and ran out. The front door of the cabin was wide open, and the night air was cold and silent. I scanned the darkness with my flashlight, but there was nothing. No tracks, no sign of anyone. But the sense of being watched was overwhelming. That's when we found the water supply contaminated. Our rain barrels had been filled with dirt and leaves, and the small stream we'd been using was dammed up with rocks and branches. It wasn't just inconvenient. It was deliberate. Someone was trying to drive us out, or worse. We were running low on food and clean water. My wife wanted to leave, but we were so far from town, and the thought of driving through the mountains at night with the kids was terrifying. I tried to keep calm, but I knew we couldn't stay much longer. We decided to leave the next morning. That night was the worst. I barely slept, listening to every creak and rustle outside. Just after midnight, I heard something outside the window. I got up, rifle in hand, and crept to the front door. I didn't want to wake the kids, so I slipped outside quietly. The moon was bright, and I could see well enough without the flashlight. I walked around the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I saw him again. He was closer this time, just standing there, staring at the cabin. He didn't move when he saw me, just stood there with this twisted smile on his face. I shouted at him to leave, to get off my property. He didn't flinch. I raised the rifle, and that's when he turned and ran back into the trees. I didn't follow him. I just went back inside and locked the door, my hands shaking. We packed up at first light. My wife and I were exhausted, but we had to get out. The kids didn't understand, and we didn't tell them everything. We just said we were going on a trip. As we loaded up the truck, I kept looking around, half expecting him to be there, watching us. We drove down the mountain slowly, the truck bouncing on the rough road. Every noise made me jump, but we didn't see him. I didn't start to relax until we reached the main road, miles from the cabin. I had planned this trip for months. I needed a break from everything, so I booked a week at a remote lodge, deep in the mountains. I didn't mind being alone. In fact, I looked forward to it. The lodge was small, cozy, and far away from any distractions. It was supposed to be perfect. But then the snowstorm hit, and it became something else entirely. When I first arrived, the storm was just starting. The sky was gray, and the wind had a bite to it, but nothing too serious. The lodge was beautiful, though. Rustic, with wood-paneled walls and a big stone fireplace that made it feel warm and welcoming. The owner had left a note on the kitchen table, telling me to make myself at home and that they'd stock the place with firewood and enough food to last a few days. It felt like a safe little hideaway from the world. The first night was peaceful. I sat by the fire with a book, listening to the wind pick up outside. It wasn't until the next day that things started to feel off. The snow was coming down hard by then, and I knew I was going to be stuck there for a while. That was fine, I brought enough books and wine to keep me company. But as I was exploring the lodge, I found an old journal tucked away in a drawer in the bedroom. The journal looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The cover was worn, and the pages were yellowed. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started reading. It belonged to someone who had stayed at the lodge a long time ago, maybe decades. The entries were mostly mundane at first, descriptions of the weather, notes about the local wildlife, but then things started to change. The entries became more frantic, more detailed. The writer talked about strange noises at night, footsteps outside their door, and a feeling of being watched. At first, they thought it was just the isolation getting to them, but it escalated quickly. They wrote about hearing someone whispering outside their window, seeing shadows moving just beyond the trees, and finding things in the lodge moved or missing. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read. It was like the writer was trying to warn anyone who found the journal, but it also felt like they were losing their grip on reality. The last few entries were the worst. They talked about someone being inside the lodge with them, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. They described waking up in the middle of the night to find a man standing at the foot of their bed, just staring at them. The last entry was barely legible, just a few shaky sentences about trying to leave, about feeling trapped. I put the journal down, suddenly aware of how quiet it was in the lodge. The wind outside had picked up, howling around the corners of the building, and the fire had burned down to embers. I tried to shake off the feeling the journal had given me, telling myself it was just a story, just the product of someone's imagination. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every little sound made me jump, the creaking of the floorboards, the wind against the windows. I kept imagining that man from the journal, standing in the dark, watching me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just a storm and the isolation playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Sometime after midnight, I heard a noise from the kitchen. It was a soft thud, like something had fallen. I froze, straining to listen, but the wind drowned out everything else. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a log shifting in the fireplace or the old building settling. But then I heard it again, closer this time, and I knew I wasn't alone. I got out of bed as quietly as I could and grabbed the heavy flashlight from the nightstand. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I crept out of the bedroom, trying to stay as quiet as possible, but the floor creaked under my feet. The lodge was pitch dark, and the beam from the flashlight seemed weak, barely cutting through the darkness. The noise came again, from the direction of the front door this time. It sounded like someone or something was trying to get in. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, but I forced myself to keep moving. I reached the kitchen, and the first thing I noticed was that the door was slightly ajar. I knew I had locked it before I went to bed. I tried to convince myself that the wind had blown it open, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I could feel cold air seeping into the room, and with it came a smell that made my stomach turn, something damp and rotten, like decaying leaves. I slowly pushed the door closed, but before I could turn the lock, I heard a creak behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the room, but there was nothing there. Just the empty kitchen, the dark windows reflecting my own terrified face back at me. I backed up against the door, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the lock. I didn't hear the creak again, but I felt like I was being watched. I felt like there was someone standing just out of sight, waiting for me to turn my back. I finally managed to lock the door, but I knew I couldn't stay in the kitchen. I didn't feel safe there. I hurried back to the bedroom, almost tripping over the edge of the rug in my panic. Once I was back inside, I slammed the door shut and shoved a chair under the doorknob, hoping it would hold if someone tried to get in. I felt ridiculous, like a child hiding from monsters under the bed, but I couldn't help it. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the corner of the room, flashlight clutched in my hand, jumping at every noise. The storm outside seemed to get worse, the wind howling like some wild animal. I kept hearing that creaking sound, and every time I did, I felt sure that whoever or whatever was outside had found a way in. When morning finally came, the storm had eased up a little, but it was still snowing heavily. I didn't want to stay in the lodge any longer. I packed my things as quickly as I could, not caring if I left anything behind. I just wanted to get out of there. The drive back to town was slow and nerve-wracking, the roads barely visible under the snow, but I didn't stop until I was miles away from that place. Even now, I can't stop thinking about that journal, about what happened to the person who wrote it. I don't know if they ever made it out, or if they're still there, waiting for someone else to find them. I had been planning to explore that old bunker for years. Ever since I'd first heard about it from some guy at a bar, the idea stuck in my head. It was just one of those things you couldn't let go of. A Cold War bunker, forgotten in the Nevada desert, left to rot. I thought it would be a good story to tell, a little adventure to break the monotony. I didn't think much about what might be inside. I didn't think it would be dangerous. When I finally got the chance to go, it was a cloudy afternoon, and the air had that stillness that makes you feel like something's going to happen. The entrance was half buried in sand, but you could still see the thick, rusted metal door. I had to force it open, the hinges screaming like they hadn't moved in decades. The sound echoed inside, and it made me hesitate for a second, but curiosity won out. I went in, flashlight in hand, ready to explore. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was damp, musty, with a hint of something sour. The walls were cold and sweating, and every step I took echoed like a gunshot in the silence. The place was bigger than I expected, with long corridors branching off into rooms filled with rusted machinery and old bunk beds. Most of it was just as I thought it would be, dusty, abandoned, forgotten. But then I started noticing things that didn't fit. In one of the rooms, I found a bed that looked like it had been slept in recently. The blanket was still crumpled, and there were a few cans of food stacked neatly in the corner. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe someone else had come through here, maybe a drifter or some other explorer. But the deeper I went, the more signs I found that this place wasn't as empty as it should have been. There were footprints in the dust, leading in all directions. I saw a makeshift kitchen in one room, with a small camp stove and some pots that were still warm to the touch. There was a pile of clothes in another, neatly folded, but covered in that same layer of dust. Everything was eerily quiet, though, like whoever was here had just stepped out and could come back any second. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I was too curious, or maybe I didn't want to admit that I was scared. I kept going, deeper into the bunker, my flashlight flickering as the batteries started to die. That's when I noticed something strange on the floor, a wire, barely visible, stretched across the hallway. It was a tripwire. My heart started pounding, and I froze, realizing that this wasn't just some abandoned place anymore. Someone was here, someone who didn't want visitors. I carefully stepped over the wire, but the feeling of being watched started to creep in. I decided it was time to get out, but when I turned to retrace my steps, I realized something was wrong. The way I had come in looked different. The corridors all looked the same, but somehow, I couldn't find the door. I started to panic, my breath coming faster, echoing off the concrete walls. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that I just needed to backtrack, but every corner I turned seemed to lead to another dead end. Then I heard a faint sound, like metal scraping on metal, coming from somewhere behind me. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Someone was following me, and they knew this place better than I did. I started to move faster, trying to find a way out, but the bunker was a maze. I turned down another corridor and nearly tripped over a pile of debris. That's when I saw the first trap, an old, rusty bear trap, hidden under a thin layer of dust and debris. It was set, ready to snap shut on anyone unlucky enough to step on it. I skirted around it, my pulse racing. Whoever was here, they had set these traps, and they were leading me deeper into the bunker. I could feel it. Each turn seemed to take me further from the exit, further from safety. The sound of footsteps behind me was getting closer, more deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They were taking their time, stalking me through the corridors, knowing I was trapped. I kept moving, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. I tried not to think about what would happen if it went out. My mind was racing, trying to remember the way back, but it was all a blur now. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air getting heavier with each step. I turned a corner and saw a faint light up ahead, a small, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was the first sign of electricity I'd seen since entering the bunker. The light gave me a moment of hope. Maybe it led to the way out. I moved toward it, but as I got closer, I saw something that made me stop cold. There was a door just beyond the light, slightly ajar, and behind it, I could hear someone breathing. It was slow, deliberate, and far too close. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound, but I must have kicked something because the breathing stopped, and the door creaked open wider. A shadow moved inside the room, and I knew I couldn't stay there. I turned and ran, not caring about the noise I was making, just wanting to get as far away from that door as possible. As I ran, the bunker seemed to shift around me. The corridors twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense, and I kept coming across the same rooms, the same debris, over and over again. It was like the place was alive, leading me in circles. The footsteps behind me had stopped, but I could still feel that presence, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I came to another intersection and saw a faint light coming from one of the corridors. This time, it wasn't a bulb, but daylight, filtering through a small gap in the ceiling. It was the first real sign of an exit I'd seen. I ran toward it, my heart pounding in my chest, but as I got closer, I realized it was just a trick of the light, a small, collapsed section of the bunker with no way out. Desperation took over. I started clawing at the debris, trying to widen the gap, but it was no use. The light was too faint and the gap too small. I could hear the footsteps again, slow and deliberate, coming closer. I turned to face the corridor, with my back against the wall, knowing there was nowhere left to run. That's when I saw him, a tall, gaunt figure emerging from the shadows. His face was hidden under a hood, but I could see the glint of metal in his hand. He didn't speak, just stood there, blocking my only escape route. I realized then that this wasn't just a game to him. He had been waiting for someone to stumble into his trap, someone to hunt through this twisted labyrinth. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed the nearest piece of debris, a rusty metal pipe, and swung it as hard as I could. He was too close, and the pipe connected with his arm. He grunted in pain, dropping the knife, but he didn't go down. I swung again, aiming for his head this time, but he was quicker than I expected. He dodged to the side and lunged at me, knocking the pipe out of my hand. We struggled, both of us slipping on the dusty floor, but I could feel his strength waning. He was malnourished, weak from who knows how long spent in this bunker. I used that to my advantage, pushing him off balance and grabbing the knife he dropped. Without thinking, I plunged it into his side. He gasped, more in shock than pain, and staggered back, clutching his wound. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I ran, ignoring the blood on my hands and the burning in my lungs, just running until I finally found the entrance. The metal door was still half open, letting in a sliver of daylight. I squeezed through and stumbled into the open air, feeling the sun on my face for the first time in what felt like hours. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition, but once I did, I floored it, speeding away from that place as fast as I could. I didn't look back. It wasn't until I was miles away, back on the main road, that I started to breathe normally again. The weight of what had just happened began to sink in, but I pushed it down, focusing on getting as far away as possible. I haven't been back to Nevada since, and I never planned to. I had always loved hiking, especially in the more remote areas where I could really get away from everything. So when I decided to go off trail in a remote part of the Appalachian Mountains, it felt like a good idea. I wanted to see something different, something untouched. It was supposed to be a day of peace and quiet, just me in the woods. The trail I had been following was well marked, but after a while, I veered off. The trees were thick, and the further I went, the quieter it got. No more sounds of other hikers, just the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. It was peaceful at first, exactly what I was looking for. But after a few hours, the peacefulness started to feel more like isolation. It was like the forest was swallowing me whole. I walked for what felt like hours, not really paying attention to where I was going, just enjoying the solitude. But then, I noticed something strange. The trees ahead of me didn't look natural. They were arranged in a way that seemed deliberate, almost like a barrier. I kept walking, and that's when I saw it, a hidden camp, tucked away in a small clearing. The camp was makeshift but well established. There were a few tents, some old furniture, and a fire pit with smoke still rising from it. It was clear someone was living there, and not just passing through. I should have turned around right then, but I was curious. Who would live out here, in the middle of nowhere? I stepped closer, trying to be quiet, but the ground was covered in dry leaves that crunched under my boots. As I got closer to the camp, I could see more details: clothes hanging from a line, pots and pans scattered around, and a few large tarps stretched between trees. It looked like a survivalist camp, or maybe a group of people living off the grid. But something felt off. The camp wasn't just hidden, it was concealed, like whoever was there didn't want to be found. Before I could decide what to do, I heard voices. They were low, gruff, and close. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as two men stepped out from behind one of the tents. They didn't see me at first, but I knew I couldn't hide for long. I was in their space, and I had no idea who they were or what they were capable of. One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered with a scruffy beard, spotted me first. His eyes narrowed, and he nudged the other man, who turned to look at me too. They both started walking toward me, not fast, but with a purpose. I tried to back away, but my foot caught on a root, and I stumbled. "Who are you?" the bearded man demanded. His voice was rough, and he had a thick Appalachian accent. I tried to answer, to explain that I was just hiking and had lost my way, but the words got stuck in my throat. He didn't seem interested in explanations anyway. He just kept coming closer, his eyes locked on me. The second man, shorter but stockier, circled around to my other side, cutting off my escape. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and threatening. "This is private land." I knew that was a lie. There was no private land out here. It was all public forest. But I wasn't about to argue with them. My instincts were screaming at me to get out, but I was trapped. The two men were closing in, and I realized they weren't going to let me leave without answers. "I'm sorry," I finally managed to say. "I didn't know anyone was out here. I'll just go back the way I came." But they didn't move. The bearded man shook his head slowly. "Too late for that," he said. "You've seen too much." I didn't know what he meant by that, but the way he said it made my blood run cold. I glanced around, looking for any possible way out, but they had me surrounded. The only way out was through them, and I didn't like my chances. "Why are you here?" the stocky man asked, his voice growing more aggressive. "Are you with someone? Did you tell anyone where you were going?" I shook my head quickly. "No, I'm alone. No one knows I'm here." It was the truth, and saying it out loud made me realize just how vulnerable I was. If something happened to me, no one would know where to look. The two men exchanged a look, and I could see them weighing their options. They weren't just concerned about me being there, they were scared. Whatever they were hiding out here, they didn't want anyone finding out. The bearded man finally spoke again. "You need to come with us. We need to make sure you're not lying." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and unyielding. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. The stocky man moved in behind me, blocking any chance of escape. Panic set in. I knew I couldn't let them take me deeper into the woods. If they got me away from the camp, there would be no way out. I acted on instinct, jerking my arm free and shoving the bearded man as hard as I could. He stumbled back, surprised, and I took my chance. I bolted, running as fast as I could toward the thickest part of the forest. Branches whipped at my face, and my lungs burned as I pushed myself to keep going. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush behind me, shouting at each other, but I didn't look back. I just ran, praying that I could lose them in the trees. The forest was a blur of green and brown, and I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. My only hope was to put as much distance between us as possible. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the sounds of pursuit, and for a moment, I thought I might actually make it. But then I heard the sound of footsteps right behind me, too close. I veered off to the left, hoping to throw them off, but I tripped on a root and went down hard, my knee slamming into the ground. Pain shot up my leg, but I forced myself to get up and keep going. I couldn't stop, not now. I heard one of them curse loudly, and it sounded further away. I had gained some ground, but I knew it wouldn't last. They knew these woods better than I did, and it was only a matter of time before they caught up. I had to think, had to find a way to lose them for good. Ahead, I saw a rocky outcrop, half covered in vines and moss. It wasn't much, but it was the only cover I had. I scrambled up the rocks, fighting back a cry as my injured knee protested. I squeezed into a narrow gap between the rocks, pulling the vines over me and trying to control my breathing. The footsteps were getting closer, and I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see me. They crashed through the underbrush, their voices growing louder as they argued about which way I had gone. I stayed as still as possible, barely daring to breathe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, their voices began to fade. I waited, listening intently, until I was sure they were gone. Only then did I dare to move. My muscles were stiff, and my knee throbbed, but I didn't care. I had to get out of there. I climbed down from the rocks, moving as quietly as I could. The woods were still and silent, but I knew they could be anywhere, still looking for me. I had to find my way back to the trail, back to safety. It took hours, but I finally found the trail. My body was aching, my clothes were torn, and my knee was swollen, but I didn't stop until I reached my car. Only when I was safely inside, the doors locked, did I allow myself to breathe. I drove away from the mountains as fast as I could, my mind racing with what had just happened. I don't know who those men were or what they were doing out there, and I don't want to know. I was stationed at the research base in Antarctica, the most isolated place I could imagine. It was just me, the endless white, and the cold. I was used to being alone, focused on my work. The station was quiet, almost too quiet, but that's what I liked about it. It was a place where I could think, away from the noise of the world. The base had been there for decades, with most of it now unused and sealed off. I was in the newer part, the part that still had heat and power. The rest of the station was dark, cold, and silent, or so I thought. I started noticing little things at first, things that didn't make sense. A door that should have been closed was open, a tool that I had put away wasn't where I left it. I told myself it was just the wind, or that I was forgetting things. But it kept happening. One night, I was working late, going over some data in the lab. The wind outside howled, making the walls creak. I was used to the noises by now, but that night, something felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I told myself it was just nerves, that I was imagining things, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I decided to check the station, just to be sure. I grabbed a flashlight and started walking through the halls. The lights flickered as I passed through the old parts of the station. The metal walls were covered in frost, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. I hadn't been in these sections for months, and they should have been completely empty. But as I walked, I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the frost on the floor, not mine, leading deeper into the dark. They were fresh, too fresh for them to have been there long. I followed the footprints, my heart pounding in my chest. They led to a door that should have been locked, but it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. Inside was a storage room, filled with old equipment and crates. But something was off. Some of the crates had been moved, and there were blankets and empty food cans in one corner. Someone had been living here. I backed out of the room, my mind racing. Who could be here? The station was supposed to be abandoned, with just me left to finish the research. I didn't know what to do. I thought about leaving, but there was nowhere to go. The nearest base was hundreds of miles away, and the weather was too bad to travel. I was trapped, with whoever or whatever was in the station with me. I decided to head back to the main part of the station, where it was warm and lit. I tried to stay calm, but every little sound made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me. But there was no one, just the empty halls and the cold. When I finally got back to the main part of the station, I locked the door behind me and sat down, trying to think. I couldn't stay there forever. I had to find out who was in the station with me. I thought about the storage room and the blankets. Whoever it was, they'd been there for a while, hiding, living off the old supplies. They must have been careful, too, not to leave too many signs. But they'd slipped up, and now I knew. I didn't know what they wanted, or why they were hiding, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. The next day, I decided to search the rest of the station. I had to know how far this went, how much of the station they were using. I checked every room, every hallway. Most were empty, just cold, dark spaces filled with old equipment. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. In one of the old labs, I found a notebook. It was old, the pages yellowed, but it had recent entries. The handwriting was messy, frantic. It talked about the cold, the isolation, the fear. The last entry was just one word, repeated over and over: escape. I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to leave, but the weather was still too bad. I was trapped, and whoever was there with me knew it. That night, I locked myself in the lab, hoping they wouldn't find me. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, listening to the sounds of the station. Every creak, every gust of wind made my heart race. I kept the flashlight in my hand, ready to defend myself if I had to. The next morning, I decided to make a break for it. I packed what I could carry and headed for the radio room. I had to call for help, but when I got there, the equipment was destroyed. The wires were ripped out, the dial smashed. Whoever was there didn't want me to contact anyone. I was completely cut off, alone in the middle of the frozen wasteland with a stranger who was clearly dangerous. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay in the station, but I couldn't leave either. The storm outside was getting worse, and I knew I wouldn't make it far. I went back to the lab and tried to think. I had to find out who was in the station with me, and why they were doing this. I couldn't keep running. I decided to go back to the storage room to see if they'd returned. When I got there, the door was open. The blankets were gone, and so were the food cans. But there was something else. A small knife, stained with blood, lay on the floor. I picked it up, my hand shaking. Someone had been hurt, and it wasn't me. I had to find them before they found me. I started searching the station again, but this time I was looking for any sign of them, anything that would give me an idea of who they were. As I moved through the station, I started to feel like I was being watched. Every time I turned a corner, I expected to see them standing there, waiting. But there was no one, just the empty halls and the cold. I kept the knife in my hand, ready to use it if I had to. I knew I was running out of time. Whoever was there was getting desperate, and so was I. I decided to check the last part of the station I hadn't searched yet, the old control room. It was the furthest from the main part of the station, and I'd been avoiding it because it was the coldest. But I had no choice. I had to know if they were there. When I got to the control room, the door was slightly open. I pushed it open slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside, the room was dark, the only light coming from the broken windows. The consoles were covered in frost, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. But there was something else. A figure hunched over one of the consoles, not moving. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was them, the person who'd been stalking me. They hadn't hurt me yet, and I knew this was my only chance. I stepped forward, the knife in my hand. But before I could do anything, the figure turned around. It was a man, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes wild. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, maybe weeks. He stared at me, and I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear I felt. He didn't say anything, just watched me, his breath ragged. I didn't know what to do. He was clearly dangerous, but he didn't seem like he was going to attack. I took a step back, and he didn't move. He just kept watching me, like he was waiting for something. I didn't want to hurt him, but I knew I couldn't let him stay there. I had to get out, and I had to make sure he didn't follow me. I didn't know where the strength came from, but I lunged at him, the knife in my hand. He didn't fight back, just let me push him to the ground. I tied him up with some old rope I found, my hand shaking the whole time. He didn't resist, just lay there, staring at me with those wild eyes. When I was done, I backed away, the knife still in my hand. I knew I couldn't stay in the station any longer. I packed what I could and left, leaving the man tied up in the control room. I didn't look back. I just kept walking through the snow and the cold until I reached the nearest base. When I got there, I told them everything, but when they went back to the station, the man was gone. I don't know who he was or why he was there, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I was lucky to get out alive. I'll never go back to that station, not as long as I live. The cold may be deadly, but it's nothing compared to the terror of knowing you're not alone. I had been searching for my sister, Anna, for weeks. She had gone off the grid a few months ago, saying she needed a break from everything, but I hadn't heard from her since. I tracked down the last place she was supposed to be, some remote community up in the mountains, way off the beaten path. It was hard to find, but I managed to get directions from a local, who warned me that the people there kept to themselves. When I arrived, the place felt off right from the start. It wasn't much, just a handful of cabins scattered around, and it didn't even have a proper name. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, and the mountains loomed heavy in the distance, like they were watching me. I knocked on the first door I saw, an old cabin with a sagging roof. A woman opened it, middle-aged, with eyes that didn't quite meet mine. I asked her about Anna, but she just shook her head and said she hadn't seen anyone like that around here. I didn't believe her. There was something in the way she said it, too quick, too practiced. I moved on to the next cabin. Same story. Nobody had seen my sister, nobody knew anything. But I noticed little things, like how the residents avoided eye contact, how they seemed almost nervous. It was like they were hiding something. By the time I got to the third cabin, I was starting to feel it too, that gnawing unease in my gut. The man at this cabin was different. He was younger, maybe in his 30s, and he had this fake smile plastered on his face. When I asked about Anna, he gave the same answer, but his eyes flicked to the side, just for a second. I followed his gaze and saw a dirt path leading into the woods. I tried to press him, but he shut the door in my face. I waited until nightfall. The place was quiet, no lights, just the sound of the wind in the trees. I decided to check out that path. It wasn't easy finding my way in the dark, but I managed. The path wound deeper into the forest, the trees closing in on me. I walked for what felt like hours, the air getting colder the further I went. And then, I saw another cabin, hidden away in the trees. It looked abandoned, windows boarded up, but I noticed footprints in the dirt, fresh ones. My heart was pounding in my chest as I crept closer. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open. The place was dark and smelled musty, like it hadn't been aired out in years. But there were signs that someone had been there recently, a half-burned candle, an old blanket on the floor. I searched the cabin, every corner, every crevice. And then I found it, a notebook, shoved under the bed. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. It was Anna's handwriting. She had been here. The last entry was messy, like she'd been in a hurry. It didn't make much sense, just ramblings about them and how she couldn't trust anyone. I froze when I heard footsteps outside. Someone was coming. I stuffed the notebook in my jacket and hid behind the door, holding my breath. The door creaked open, and I saw the young man from earlier step inside. He looked around, his face twisted in anger. He must have noticed the notebook was gone because he started cursing under his breath. I waited until he left, my heart still racing. I knew I couldn't go back to the village, not now. They had lied to me, all of them, and now they knew I was onto them. I had to find Anna, had to get us both out of there. But I didn't know where to start. The notebook didn't have any clues, just those frantic, desperate words. I decided to head back to the village, but I took a different route, staying off the path. I didn't want to run into anyone. When I got close, I saw smoke rising from the chimneys. They were all still awake, probably planning what to do with me. I stayed hidden in the trees, watching. That's when I noticed one of the cabins at the far end, the one I hadn't been to yet. It had a light on inside. I crept closer, careful not to make a sound. When I got to the window, I peeked in. There were two people inside, a man and a woman, both dressed in those same worn-out clothes the villagers wore. But what caught my eye was the board on the wall, covered in maps and notes. One of them had Anna's name on it, circled in red. My blood ran cold. They had been watching her, maybe even following her. I didn't know what they wanted with her, but it wasn't good. I had to do something, but I couldn't just storm in there. I was outnumbered and unarmed. I decided to wait until they left. It was a long, agonizing wait, but eventually they put out the light and went to bed. I forced the door open as quietly as I could and slipped inside. The map showed the surrounding area, with markings and notes in a language I didn't recognize. But there was one thing that stood out, a circle drawn around a spot deeper in the mountains. I grabbed the map and a few of the notes, then slipped back out before they could wake up. I made my way to the marked spot, using the map to guide me. It was even further up the mountain, a place where the trees were thicker, the air colder. I didn't know what I'd find there, but I had to try. The climb was tough, the ground uneven and the wind biting at my face. But I kept going, driven by the thought of finding Anna. When I finally reached the spot, I saw something that made my heart stop. It was another cabin, but this one was different, newer, sturdier, like it had been built recently. There were no windows, just a heavy door with a padlock. My hand shook as I tried the key I'd found in the cabin below. It fit. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. I stepped inside, my breath catching in my throat. The place was empty, just a single room with a bed and a chair. But on the bed, curled up under a blanket, was Anna. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear, but when she saw it was me, she broke down in tears. I ran to her, pulling her into my arms. She was weak, shaking, like she hadn't eaten in days. I asked her what happened, but she just kept saying she needed to leave, that they were coming. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed her and we made our way back down the mountain, moving as fast as we could. I knew the villagers would be after us soon, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to leave her there. We made it back to my car just as the sun was coming up. I didn't stop driving until we were miles away, far from that cursed place. Anna didn't speak the whole way, just stared out the window, lost in her thoughts. It wasn't until we were safe, back in civilization, that she finally told me everything. She had gone to that village looking for peace, but what she found was something else entirely. They had taken her, kept her there, feeding her lies until she didn't know what was real anymore. They were planning something terrible, and they weren't going to let her leave. She didn't know why they let me go, why they didn't just come after us, but I didn't care. All that mattered was that we were safe. We never spoke of it again. Anna moved far away, changed her name, tried to forget. But I know she never really did. Neither did I. I had been hiking alone in the mountains for a few days, just me and my backpack, enjoying the solitude. I wasn't planning on staying out too long, but the storm hit faster than I expected. The sky turned dark, the wind picked up, and I knew I needed to find shelter fast. I remembered passing a small, rundown shelter a few miles back, so I turned around and headed for it. When I got there, the place looked even worse up close. It was old, with peeling paint and a roof that looked like it could cave in any minute, but it was the only option I had. The wind was howling, and the rain started coming down hard. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The place was small, just one room with a couple of broken down bunks and a table in the middle. It smelled musty, like it hadn't been used in years, but at least it was dry. I set my backpack down and sat on one of the bunks, trying to shake off the cold. I planned to wait out the storm, maybe sleep there for the night if I had to. As I was getting settled, I noticed something odd. There were fresh footprints in the dirt on the floor, leading to the back corner of the room. My heart started beating a little faster, but I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe another hiker had passed through recently. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I followed the footprints to the corner, where an old wooden cabinet stood. It was out of place, too new compared to the rest of the shelter. I opened the cabinet door and found something that made my blood run cold, a stack of bags, each one packed full of something. I pulled one out and unzipped it. Inside were bundles of cash, neatly wrapped in plastic. There were also some guns, all in good condition. I realized right then that this wasn't just an old mountain shelter. It was being used as a stash spot, probably for something illegal. My first thought was to get out of there as fast as I could, but the storm outside was raging. I was stuck, at least until it let up. I zipped the bag back up, closed the cabinet, and tried to calm down. Maybe if I just stayed quiet and out of sight, whoever was using the place wouldn't know I was there. But then I heard voices outside. My heart stopped. I could hear footsteps, heavy ones, coming closer to the shelter. There were at least 3 people, talking in low voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I froze, my mind racing. If they found me, I knew it wouldn't end well. I looked around the room, searching for a place to hide, but there wasn't much to work with. The only option was under one of the bunks. I grabbed my backpack and crawled under the bunk, pulling the bag over me as much as I could. It wasn't a great hiding spot, but it was the best I had. I held my breath as the door creaked open and the men walked in. I could see their boots through the gaps in the bunk slats. They were talking, laughing about something, but I couldn't focus on the words. All I could think about was staying still, staying silent. One of them walked over to the cabinet, and I heard him open it. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. He started rummaging through the bags, checking the contents. "Everything's here," he said, his voice low and rough. The others seemed satisfied with that, and they started talking about their plans, how they'd come back in a few days to move the stuff. I prayed they'd leave quickly, but then one of them said something that made my blood run cold. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice suddenly tense. The others stopped talking, and I could feel the air in the room shift. One of them started walking towards the bunks, slowly, like he was trying to listen for something. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. He was right above me now, his boots just inches from my face. I heard him bend down, and I shut my eyes tight, expecting the worst. But then the other guy called him back. "It's nothing," he said. "Come on, let's get out of here." The guy hesitated, then finally turned and walked back to the others. I didn't dare move until I heard the door close behind them and their voices fade into the storm. When I was sure they were gone, I crawled out from under the bunk, my whole body shaking. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. The storm was still raging outside, but I didn't care. I grabbed my backpack and bolted up the door, not stopping to look back. The wind and rain hit me like a wall, but I kept running, down the mountain and away from that shelter. I didn't stop until I was far away, back on a main trail, where I knew I'd be safe. I never told anyone what happened, never reported what I found. I didn't want to think about it, didn't want to remember those voices, those boots just inches from my face. But I knew I'd never go back to those mountains again. My car broke down in the middle of nowhere. I had been driving through the Nevada desert for hours, heading to a friend's place, when the engine just stopped. No warning, no sputtering, just silence. The gas gauge was fine, so it wasn't that. I tried starting it again, but nothing. The sun was starting to set, and I was alone on a stretch of road that didn't see much traffic. I got out of the car and looked around. The desert stretched out in every direction, just flat land and scrubby bushes as far as I could see. I had no cell signal, of course. I thought about staying in the car, but I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait. It was getting cold fast, and I didn't have much water left. I needed help. After what felt like forever, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. I waved my arms as the vehicle got closer, praying they'd stop. It was an old pickup truck, rusted and dirty. The driver slowed down and rolled down his window when he got to me. He was a middle-aged guy, rough-looking, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. "Need some help?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, like he smoked too much. I told him about my car, how it just stopped working, and asked if he had a phone or if he could take me to the nearest town. He looked me up and down, taking a long pause before he finally nodded. "I can take you," he said. "There's a gas station a few miles up the road. They got a tow truck there." I hesitated for a moment. Something about him made me uneasy, but I didn't have many options. The sun had almost completely set, and the temperature was dropping fast. I didn't want to spend the night in my car, so I climbed into his truck. We drove in silence for a while. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. The road was dark now, and I kept looking out the window, trying to spot anything familiar. But it was just desert, the same as before. After what felt like too long, I glanced over at the man. He was staring straight ahead, not saying a word. I asked him how far the gas station was. "Not far," he said, but he didn't look at me when he said it. Another few minutes passed, and I started to feel that unease turn into fear. I realized we hadn't passed any other cars, and there were no signs of civilization anywhere. The road we were on was nothing but dirt and rocks, no lights, no signs, nothing. I asked him again how much farther it was. "Don't worry," he said, still not looking at me. "We're almost there." My heart was pounding in my chest now. Something was wrong. I could feel it. I told him to stop the truck, that I wanted to get out. He didn't answer, just kept driving, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight. I started to panic, reaching for the door handle, but he reached over and grabbed my arm, squeezing it hard. "Sit still," he said, his voice cold. "You're not going anywhere." I knew then that I was in serious trouble. I started to struggle, trying to pull away from him, but he was strong, much stronger than I was. He kept one hand on the wheel and the other on my arm, steering the truck off the dirt road and onto a narrow, barely visible path that led deeper into the desert. I was shaking, my mind racing, trying to think of a way out. But we were in the middle of nowhere, and I had no idea where we were going. The truck bounced and jolted as we drove over the rough terrain, and I could see nothing but darkness outside. He finally stopped the truck in a small clearing surrounded by rocks. There was no gas station, no sign of life anywhere. He turned off the engine and looked at me, his eyes cold and empty. "Get out," he said. I didn't move. I was frozen with fear. He leaned over, opened the door on my side, and shoved me out of the truck. I hit the ground hard, scraping my hands and knees on the rocks. He got out too, slamming the door behind him. "Start walking," he said, pointing to the darkness ahead. I didn't know what to do. If I ran, I knew he'd catch me. If I stayed, I didn't know what he had planned, but it wasn't good. I started walking, my legs trembling, trying to think of a way out. He followed behind me, too close for me to try anything. After a few minutes, he grabbed my arm again and spun me around to face him. "You shouldn't have flagged me down," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Should have stayed in your car." I was crying now, pleading with him to let me go, to take me back to the road. But he just shook his head, a cruel smile on his face. "Too late for that," he said. "Now, you're gonna do exactly what I say, or you won't make it out of here." I knew I had to do something, anything, to get away from him. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. I noticed a large rock nearby, and as he turned away for a moment, I made a split-second decision. I grabbed the rock and swung it at him with all my strength. I hit him in the side of the head, and he stumbled, letting go of my arm. I didn't wait to see if he'd recover. I turned and ran, as fast as I could, into the darkness. I could hear him cursing, hear his footsteps behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran through the desert, tripping over rocks and bushes, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, but I kept running, desperate to get away from him. The darkness was disorienting, and I could barely see where I was going, but I didn't stop. I could hear him getting closer, his footsteps growing louder, but I didn't dare look back. Finally, I saw a faint light in the distance. I didn't know what it was, but it was my only hope. I ran toward it, my lungs burning, my legs feeling like they would give out any second. As I got closer, I realized it was a small cabin with a light on inside. I reached the door and banged on it, screaming for help. The door opened, and an older man stepped out, looking confused. I pushed past him, slamming the door shut behind me. I could hear the truck engine starting up in the distance, and I knew the man who had picked me up was driving away, leaving me in the safety of the stranger's cabin. I collapsed on the floor, shaking and crying, but I was safe. I had made it out alive. The older man called the police, and they came out to the cabin to take my statement. I never saw that man again, but the memory of that night still haunts me. I went out to the forest to practice some survival techniques, just like I'd done a few times before. It was supposed to be a weekend to test myself, see how well I could manage with just the basics. The forest was deep and quiet, the kind of place where you wouldn't expect to see another soul for miles. That was the whole point. It was just supposed to be me, nature, and the gear in my pack. I hiked in for about half a day, making sure I was far enough from the main trails. The deeper I went, the more overgrown the paths became until there wasn't really a path at all, just trees and underbrush. That's when I found a spot that seemed perfect, a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, a stream nearby for water. I set up my camp, feeling good about the isolation. The first day went as planned. I built a shelter, gathered some firewood, and spent the evening enjoying the quiet. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As the sun set, I felt at peace, like I was exactly where I needed to be. The next morning, I decided to explore the area a bit more. I wandered deeper into the forest, not really aiming for anywhere specific, just letting the terrain guide me. That's when I noticed something strange. The sound of chainsaws in the distance, muffled but unmistakable. It was odd because this part of the forest was supposed to be protected, no logging allowed. Curiosity got the better of me, so I headed in that direction, making sure to stay quiet. As I got closer, I saw them. A group of men, 5 or 6, were working around a large pile of felled trees. They had equipment, chainsaws, trucks, and even a small bulldozer. They were deep in it, moving quickly like they were on a tight schedule. It didn't take long to realize what was going on. These guys weren't supposed to be there. They were logging illegally, taking down trees in a protected area. I crouched down behind some thick bushes, watching them. My first instinct was to get out of there, but something kept me frozen in place. Maybe it was shock or just not wanting to believe what I was seeing. As I watched, one of the men, the one who seemed to be in charge, looked around like he sensed something was off. He shouted something to the others, and they all stopped working. They were on alert now. My heart started pounding. I knew I had to get out of there before they noticed me, but as I turned to leave, I stepped on a branch. The crack was loud enough to echo through the trees. I heard someone yell, and I knew they had heard me. I took off running, not caring about staying quiet anymore. I just needed to put as much distance between me and them as possible. The forest was dense, but I knew it better than they did. I'd been studying the terrain, the patterns of the land, so I had a good sense of where I was going. But I could hear them behind me, crashing through the underbrush, shouting at each other to spread out and find me. I pushed myself harder, weaving through the trees, trying to stay out of sight. My breath was coming in gasps, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. This was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, a challenge I set for myself, not a life or death situation. But here I was, running for my life from men who had every reason to make sure I didn't leave the forest. I came to a steep slope and half slid, half ran down it, hoping it would slow them down. My foot caught on a root, and I went tumbling, hitting the ground hard. For a second, I was too dazed to move. But I knew I couldn't stay there. I forced myself up, even though my ankle throbbed in pain. I limped forward, trying to stay out of sight. I found a small hollow at the base of a tree and squeezed myself into it, covering myself with branches and leaves. I could hear them getting closer, their voices carrying through the trees. They were angry now, frustrated that they hadn't caught me yet. I stayed as still as I could, barely breathing. One of them walked right past me, so close I could see the mud on his boots. He paused, looking around, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me. After what felt like an eternity, he moved on, shouting to the others that they needed to check another area. I didn't dare move for a long time, even after their voices faded. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't just stay there, but I knew I couldn't outrun them with my injured ankle. I needed a plan, something that would give me a chance to get out of the forest alive. I remembered seeing a river on my map, not too far from where I was. If I could make it there, I might be able to follow it downstream to a road or a town. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I carefully crawled out of the hollow, trying not to make any noise. My ankle protested with every step, but I pushed through the pain. I couldn't afford to be slow. I moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows, using the trees for cover. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made my heart skip a beat, but I kept going. I had to. The river wasn't far now. I could hear the faint sound of water rushing over rocks. It gave me a small flicker of hope. But then I heard them again, closer this time. They were spreading out, covering more ground. I could hear the leader barking orders, telling them to find me before dark. I knew that if they caught me, it would be over. These weren't the kind of men who would let a witness walk away. I finally reached the river. The water was cold and fast, but I didn't have a choice. I waded in, hoping the current would cover my tracks and throw them off my trail. The water reached my waist, soaking me to the bone, but I kept moving, keeping close to the bank where the water was shallowest. I followed the river for what felt like hours, the cold seeping into my bones, making it hard to think. My ankle was getting worse, the pain shooting up my leg with every step. I knew I couldn't keep going like this, but I couldn't stop either. The river was my only chance. Just when I thought I couldn't go any farther, I saw a bridge up ahead. It was old and rickety, but it meant there might be a road nearby. I forced myself to keep moving, every step a battle against the pain and exhaustion. As I reached the bridge, I heard a truck engine in the distance. I froze, ducking down behind some bushes. The truck rumbled over the bridge, the sound of it sending a wave of fear through me. But it kept going, disappearing into the distance. I waited until the sound faded completely before I crawled out of my hiding spot. I knew I was close to getting out of there. I just needed to find that road. I stumbled across the bridge, each step feeling like it might be my last. But then, through the trees, I saw a narrow dirt road, barely more than a track, but it was a way out. I limped towards it, every part of me screaming in pain, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I finally reached the road, I collapsed to the ground, too exhausted to move. But I was safe. I had made it out of the forest. I don't know how long I lay there before a car came by. The driver was a local, an old man who lived nearby. He helped me into his truck and drove me to the nearest town. I didn't tell him what happened, just that I had gotten lost and hurt myself. I didn't want to drag him into it. But as he drove me away from that forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that those men were still out there, somewhere in the trees, waiting for their next chance to silence anyone who got too close. I decided to take a solo fishing trip to a remote lake I had read about. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape, a break from the noise of city life. The lake was far off the beaten path, nestled in the mountains. I was excited to get away from everything for a few days and just enjoy some quiet time. When I arrived at the lake, the weather was perfect. It was early morning, and the mist was just beginning to lift off the water. I set up my camp by the edge of the lake. I made sure to set up my tent, get my fishing gear ready, and prepare everything for a relaxing stay. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water and the occasional bird call. The first day was just as I had hoped. I spent hours fishing and even caught a couple of decent-sized fish. I cooked one over the fire and enjoyed it with a simple meal. As night fell, I was content and feeling grateful for the solitude. That's when things started to get a little strange. I noticed the next morning that some of my food supplies were missing. I thought maybe I had left something out and it had been scavenged by animals, though I wasn't sure. I made a mental note to be more careful with my food. The second night, I heard something rustling outside my tent. I was already on edge from the missing food, so I lay still and listened. The sound stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there. I didn't get much sleep that night. The next morning, I found footprints around my camp. They were large and booted, not the kind of tracks you'd expect from animals. I couldn't imagine who else would be out here. The lake was remote, and I had seen no other cars or signs of people on my drive in. I tried to brush it off, thinking it could be some other camper, though it felt odd to see tracks so close to my tent. The third night was worse. The noises outside were louder, like someone was moving around deliberately. I shone my flashlight outside, but there was nothing visible. My nerves were frayed, and I could hardly sleep. I kept my bear spray and knife close, just in case. The next day, I decided to take a closer look around the area. I followed the tracks from my camp into the woods, hoping to find some answers. The tracks led to a small clearing a little ways from the lake. There was a fire pit and some discarded food wrappers. It looked like someone had been using this spot as a base. I felt a chill run down my spine. Whoever had been here was definitely living off the grid. I found a few more signs, broken branches, old cans, and a makeshift shelter hidden among the trees. It was clear that this place had been used recently. The more I saw, the more uneasy I felt. I decided to head back to my camp and pack up early. I didn't want to stay here any longer than necessary. I packed my gear quickly, but as I was loading my car, I noticed more footprints around my campsite. They were closer than before. Someone had been watching me, I realized with a sickening feeling. I heard a rustling noise and looked up to see a figure in the distance. It was hard to make out details, but the shape was unmistakable. I didn't wait to see more. I threw my last items into the car, locked it up, and started the engine. I drove away as fast as I could, my heart racing. The drive out of the area was nerve-wracking. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see someone following me. The road was winding and remote, adding to the tension. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow more menacing. I was just desperate to get out of the forest and onto a main road. When I finally reached the highway, I felt a wave of relief. I stopped at a gas station and called the local ranger station to report what I had seen. They told me they would send someone to investigate, but I didn't stick around to find out what happened next. I just wanted to put as much distance between me and that lake as possible. I drove straight home, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Even now, thinking back on it, I still get chills. The idea that someone had been living out there, watching me, and possibly intending to confront me if I had stayed longer, it's unsettling. I'm just grateful I made it out safely. The experience has made me rethink how I approach solo trips. I had always enjoyed the solitude, but now I'm more cautious. I'm not sure who was out there or what their intentions were, but I'm glad I listened to my instincts and left when I did. We were out camping, middle of nowhere, enjoying the quiet. But then, we stumbled upon these weird things, traps of some sort. They looked deliberate, like someone set them up. At first, we thought they were animal traps, but they seemed different. We tried to ignore them, thinking maybe it was just a hunter nearby. But the traps, they were strategically placed around our campsite. It didn't sit right with us. It felt like they were meant for us. We started feeling paranoid, watched. Who would set these up? And why? The sun set, and that's when fear kicked in. Every sound, every rustle in the bushes had us on alert. We kept watch, not knowing if someone was out there, targeting us. We debated leaving, but where would we go? We were in the middle of nowhere, and it felt safer to stay together. Night fell, and the traps felt ominous in the dark. We couldn't relax, couldn't sleep. Fear had its grip on us. Every shadow seemed like a threat. We were jumpy, nerves on edge. We had no idea who was out there or what they wanted. Morning didn't bring relief. The traps were still there, a reminder of the danger lurking around us. We checked our surroundings constantly, feeling exposed. The sense of being watched wouldn't leave us alone. We tried to make light of it, said it could be a prank. But deep down, we knew it was something more serious. The traps, they seemed like a warning. A warning to stay away or else. We debated leaving again, but fear rooted us in place. What if they followed us? What if they were waiting for us to leave? It felt like a cat and mouse game, and we were the prey. We gathered our things, ready to bolt at any sign of trouble. But we were on edge, every snap of a twig making us jump. Hours passed, and the tension didn't ease. It felt like a nightmare, not knowing who or what was out there. We kept a fire going, hoping it would scare off whoever was messing with us. But the fear lingered, heavy in the air. We heard distant sounds, voices maybe. It sent shivers down our spines. Were they getting closer? We debated calling for help, but who would believe us? Traps in the woods, it sounds crazy. We were on high alert, fearing the unknown. What if they wanted to harm us? What if we were their target? We didn't sleep that night, kept watch until morning. But the traps, they were a chilling reminder that we weren't alone. When dawn broke, we packed up in a hurry, eager to get out of there. The fear stayed with us, the uncertainty haunting our thoughts. That camping trip, it was supposed to be an escape. But it turned into a nightmare, a constant fear of being targeted by someone we couldn't see. It's the kind of fear that sticks with you, makes you question every sound in the dark.